Welcome to Snow Talk, where the Snow and Ice Management Association brings you trends, stories, news, and personalities that are shaping the professional snow and ice management industry. This season of Snow Talk is sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX, so settle in and let's talk snow.
When plowing is your profession, it's up to you to keep the world moving through winter's worst. Less time worrying about your equipment is more time for clearing lots. So we'll cut to the chase. Only Western builds efficiency into every feature of our plows and spreaders. With 65 years of experience behind us, we know what it takes to save time and stay profitable. So we make one promise: more jobs done faster.
Hello, welcome to Snow Talk, the podcast of the Snow and Ice Management Association. I'm Cheryl Higley, Director of Education and Content for SIMA, and I'm excited to kick off the 2024 season with two industry professionals who are doing a lot of advocacy work to improve the snow and ice management industry in Ontario. I'm here today with Jim Monk, CSP of MPS Property Services, and Gerald Boot of Boots Landscaping. Let's start with just, first a little bit of background with the two of you on how you've come to work together on a lot of the issues that we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. Well, I think we both share a long experience within the snow industry. I'll talk a little bit about mine. I've been in the snow game for about 35 years. I got into it right coming out of university and decided to turn it into a career. Within that framework, I realized that there's really no education or formal training for it. So I got involved with some of the trade associations, initially with, Landscape Ontario I was a member of, but became quite active with SIMA, got involved in some of the committees, joined the board and served a term as president. And SIMA's been a really big beacon for me and for our company in terms of best practices and networking, and really helping us have a source to go to learn some of the things that, you learn either firsthand or by speaking with other people that have been through certain things. I've been involved with Landscape Ontario and particularly the Snow Commodities Group for quite some time. And we've also become ISO certified. So there aren't too many companies in Canada or North America that have that, but another source of learning and helping us really run a professional business. So that's kind of my snow history.
Yeah, so I started my business back in 81 and I've been doing snow ever since. Got involved in the industry through Landscape Ontario, eventually got on the board, president of the association, and served probably for 20 years on the Landscape Ontario board. Also sat on the maintenance commodity group for Landscape Ontario. And at those meetings, we started talking more about snow issues than maintenance issues. And so we started the snow commodity group, the snow sector group for Landscape Ontario. And I don't know, that's probably got to be 20, 25 years ago. And that's where I met Jim. Jim eventually ended up on that board as well. In terms of my professional development, I was part of the certification program for horticulture and landscaping, and one of the auditors. And that was back in, I think it was in 2005, where we started the CLPs, I think it was. And that was done with the Landscape Association in the U.S. And through that, I also became a member of SIMA and took their courses. And then through Landscape Ontario and the Snow Sector Group, we started having lots of insurance issues. And that was the impetus to start the Snow Sector Group for Landscape Ontario. Was the snow insurance rates just started to go through the roof. And it got worse, as we'll talk about in a few minutes.
So insurance, you mentioned that the insurance component is kind of what kind of started this path down the advocacy road of a lot of the work you guys are doing. Do you want to just talk a little bit about, in the United States, it's been very common that insurance is a difficult thing to manage. Has it been the same in Canada, or are you starting to see more of that, and that is what kind of stoked the fire to get that insurance component going?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. What we didn't mention, Gerald and I both kind of work in Southern Ontario and in Toronto in particular. And I've got a lot of contacts, throughout Canada, throughout the States. And I would argue that Toronto in particular is as litigious as anywhere in North America, which sounds like it's hard to believe, but certainly within the snow game, very, very aggressive personal injury lawyers, incredible amounts of marketing and advertising to get people to make claims or claims on things that are not even anybody's responsibility other than their own. But that's really what the problem is with the insurance industry. It's transactional. And in every circumstance, the insurance company is trying to get out of a claim as quickly and as cheaply as possible. So in the short term, that means they're saving money in terms of not going to court, not going and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend a claim and win. They'll spend, $40, $50, $100,000 to pay out and make the claim go away. It does a couple of different things. One, and the biggest, I guess, is that it sends a message to people that make a claim, you'll get paid. And I think statistically, I've seen 98% of claims, there is some degree of payout. So it becomes a very self-fulfilling prophecy. The other problem with this approach, insurance is transactional. And my frustration was that there was really no effort to make us better as a company, as an industry, make us more defendable. What can we do to prevent this from happening in the future, from reducing claims to nothing? We work really hard in a very difficult industry, and we're held to a perfection or a standard of perfection. And the insurance company wasn't, or the insurance industry has no interest in changing that. They just look at what the payouts have been, what they have to charge to make money. And the result has been, in the last decade, a huge, huge increase in premiums and even bigger in deductibles. And so, it's not uncommon to hear of guys talking about a $50,000 or $100,000 deductible. So essentially they're self-insuring, but paying the insurance company to do it. So that was sort of my catalyst to look for something different.
Yeah, and I got to a point where I had a renewal, and the renewal rates were ridiculous. And that's why, actually, I ended up talking to Jim about it. And at that point, we both joined the self-insurance retention program. And we were basically two of the companies that started this thing. The problem with insurance companies is, as Jim says, they want to get out of the claim. They get out of it in the most cost-effective way. And what happens at the end of the year, they run their numbers, they get their actuaries, run their numbers, and they really don't care what the premium is. And so as a result, we had to look at other options. Like, the numbers were ridiculous. I think increases were being seen, prices were tripled. And then there was deductibles added. Like, we never had a deductible in the past. And I think my numbers went from 150 grand to 300,000-400,000 per year for insurance. Those were the quotes I was getting.
So then talk a little bit about the path you guys decided to take, exploring that other option of the self-insured retention program.
Yeah, so self-insured retention is not a new concept. It's a group of contractors, or I guess anybody looking for insurance, that pay into a pool, handle claims internally, and have an umbrella sort of on top of that of traditional insurance that'll kick in if the pool's drained. So I think it was an association event. There was a group, an insurance broker, an adjuster who had kind of been through a similar path with the elevator industry. They had a very parallel run, lots of claims on elevators of doors closing too hard or floors not level, that kind of thing. Same results. You make a claim, you're going to get paid. And in that industry, they formed a self-insured retention and really looked at a couple of different things, but what can they do to make themselves more defendable? And their big method on that was developing a standard that's since been enacted, and now they're working to something. How quickly should an elevator door close? How level should the floor be? And if they can prove that those things are happening, then the claim goes away because there's no basis for that claim to go forward. So they were looking for another industry, and I guess we're pretty obvious. The numbers that we spend on insurance, deductible, all that type of stuff, it's attractive to lots of different people, but they also realized the unfairness of the industry and how things were going. So they were the catalyst to start this self-insured retention group. And we as contractors kind of looked at it and thought that it was a better way to go forward. So it started off as a pretty small pool, 6 or 8 contractors, something like that. Here we are 4 or 5 years later, and I think there's 35 or so, and representing some of the bigger companies in the Toronto region. Within that framework, really worked hard at making ourselves more defendable. So we have standards that a company has to meet or agree to meeting to be part of the group. GPS, third-party verification of all of our trucks, equipment, personnel, logs that are verifiable by GPS. A lot of focus on contract management. So becoming aware of what we're actually signing when we're given a contract by our customer. We developed a contract that we use when we're the ones providing the contract, but really being aware of the pitfalls, the hold harmless and indemnification clauses, and how to negotiate those to, reduce the liability that we're kind of being forced to wear. Yeah, really working on best practices, trying to become more defendable as a group, because that pool of money is ours. If it doesn't get spent, it gets returned to us on a prorated basis. So there's a financial incentive for us to become better contractors, but also within the industry, more defendable.
Yeah, the other key thing is the way it works is the contractor is on the hook for his deductible. So when there's a claim, and even if there isn't a claim, every incident that we have, we report that to our adjuster. And then there's a certain amount of information that we give them, copies of the contracts, the GPS reports, the timesheets, the weather, pre-season inspection, all that stuff. They get all that. And what happens is they get paid to gather that data. And they'll, at times, depending on the case, even launch an investigation as to what happened on this claim, so that should a claim actually come in, we're ready for it and can deal with it. So the contractor pays the first $25,000. That's our deductible for everybody. Once that money is used up, then the pool pays the costs. And once the money in the pool runs dry, then the insurance company pays. And the way it works is there's a silo for each year. So every year we get assessed based on our premium for our deductible our pool contribution, as well as the insurance company gets a cut, gets their premium. So every year it changes. Like there's a different silo for every year. And it probably takes 5, 6, 7 years for these silos to have all the claims or potential claims cleared out. And then, as Jim says, when there's money left over, it gets divvied back to the respective contractors. The other thing that happens, if the insurance company doesn't pay out, I think we get about 15 to 17% of our premiums back. So there's a huge financial upside. And to Jim's point, contractors have to comply with the standard that the group has. And as a group, we have an independent auditor who goes and audits every company once a year to make sure that we're following the guidelines that we have set out as a group for each of us to comply with. A company that doesn't comply could get removed from the group. And a few years ago, we actually removed the company from the group because they didn't comply.
So there's a whole level of kind of self-accountability, peer-to-peer accountability with this type of program.
Very much so. One other piece that I'll just expand on a little bit, and that has to do with the reporting. As Gerald said, if we become aware of an incident, even if it's not a claim, we are obligated to report it and do an investigation. And as Gerald said, that's, if it does become a claim down the road, then we've already got the file put together. But more importantly, it gives us the opportunity for the adjuster to approach the potential plaintiff and kind of talk to them before they go and get represented. Once they have a lawyer, lawyers know how to play the game. Doesn't matter if there's any merit in the claim, there's going to be a payout. Whereas, we can have a conversation with a potential plaintiff and kind of circumvent that. So that's pretty powerful.
Have you found that if that has been an experience where you've actually talked to the plaintiff or potential plaintiff where they've not filed the claim, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of hard to measure that because you can never know what they would have done. But certainly by, presenting our side, what we did, how we did it, why we did it, where there may be strengths or weaknesses in their argument, and maybe coming to a financial agreement much, much earlier in the process, there's less of a financial cost. So hard to know exactly, but I think it's effective.
Okay.
See, the other thing, like quite often what happens is we'll get a notice that they're filing. And at that point, we're all prepared and ready to go. Then our adjuster may move on them very quickly and present our case, which will force them to sort of back off. And because there's no good legislation in the province of Ontario, we have to sort of do the same thing that insurance companies should have been doing, negotiate on the behalf of the contractor. And part of the negotiation in a self-insurance model is the contractor is involved, and in the negotiation process, the claims adjuster, the claims representative for our group cannot do anything unless he is authorized by the contractor. He can't make an offer to settle a claim unless he first runs it by the contractor and gives reasons why he's offering or countering their offer to settle. Because we're paying the deductibles, which means we also have to, as individual contractors, pay the costs if it goes to discovery. So these are tough decisions. And right now, we don't have the legislation to really make these claims go away in the proper way because of, and I guess we'll get into that a little bit later, because all the liability is on the contractor currently.
Okay.
One of the first things that we did is we approached, and this again was as we were developing our best practices and contracts and standard for our self-insurance group, the adjusters asked me, he says, should we get a standard for the industry? And he says, I have a contact where we can maybe make that happen. I says, absolutely, let's make this happen. So he was able to get us in contact with the CSA, which is the Canadian Standards Association. And so back in 2020, we were able to have a conference with industry stakeholders, building owners across the country. And in May of 2022, they released a workshop agreement assessing that and agreeing that, yes, we need a snow and ice standard for Canada. And they had identified 4 key issues: liability, training, environment, and there's no regulatory framework. Those were the 4 key issues that indicated that indeed we do need something regarding a standard for this country. And then at that time, we asked the CSA, after that, we said, okay, can you help us do this? Can you do this? And then they came back to us and said, we can't do it. So then we went on we went back to the snow sector group, indicated that, okay, well, let's start working on this ourselves. So the first thing we did was we developed curriculum, which is the education piece and the training piece that is lacking. And maybe Jim can speak to that.
Sure. I'll just speak to the standard itself. In the absence of a standard, we are judged against a standard of perfection. So if there's a claim, merits or not, doesn't matter. There's a claim. Obviously, we did something wrong. We look back at what the weather records were, and a judge, or however the process goes, if it goes that far, they'll look at the weather and say, well, it started snowing at 8 p.m. You should have known that it was going to start snowing, and you should have been there at 6 p.m. or something along those lines. Or, you put down salt, but somebody fell, so obviously you didn't put down enough salt. So whatever happened, the argument was we were negligent in some way. And that gets really tough because how can you, there wasn't the technology back then to really keep forecasts, because a forecast can be very, very different from an actual what happened and what gets measured. So if we're making decisions based on the forecast, but the weather changes, that isn't taken into account the way the system was. So we needed a standard. We needed to be able to show what the forecast was. And we've got to be working against something that is going to be achievable, that's accepted. One of the big ones, the easiest one to speak about is salt. How much salt should you be putting down? And as I said, if someone fell, you obviously didn't put down enough salt. So that's where you get into the environmental component. We're putting down more salt than is needed in many, many cases because the fear of liability of getting, somebody making a claim is pretty expensive. So we put down salt and hope it goes away. And of course, there's environmental costs associated with that. So that was the reason we wanted to go to a standard, so that, tell us what we have to do and we'll be able to verify and prove that we did it. And we've got to be able to be protected when we get to that point.
Because the CSA was not able to do it and help us through it, we first developed the things that we needed for the industry, which would be all part of the standard, right? To have a standard, you have to make sure that your contractors, that the industry is educated and trained. So we started working on that, and we've got a curriculum put together with 5 courses. And those courses, it starts with a basic safety course, and then there's a snow apprentice course, which is an entry level course, and then there's an assistant supervisor course. That's for someone who has developed some experience and can sort of assist the manager or a supervisor. There's a supervisor and dispatcher course. There's a manager and owner course. And then there's the pre-season inspection course. Now, that pre-season inspection course is a standalone course, which eventually building owners need to do themselves or hire a consultant to do. Because the other thing that we've done is we've gone to the government, the Ontario government, and we've told them we want to do and create safe places and safe conditions for Ontario while still respecting the environment. In other words, we don't want to put down too much salt and destroy infrastructure and waterways. We want to put down the right amount of salt at the right time. The other thing that we need to do is reform the liability system so that we balance the risk. And the risk is balanced between the owner of the property and the contractor. And that's where the pre-season inspection comes in. And what we would do is have a regulatory framework set up so that building owners have to do hazard assessments of their properties on an annual basis. And that's what that pre-season inspection course would train building owners, consultants on doing. You see, and the problem we've had is you get a pothole, it freezes, you get water in it, it freezes, somebody falls. When you do, and we get sued, contractors blamed. There's a pre-season inspection. There's an obligation for the building owner to deal with that hazard, either in a permanent fashion or in a temporary fashion. And that way, and right now as contractors in our SIR group, we're doing those pre-season inspections. We're telling owners, fix those potholes, deal with those downspouts, put the snow in this location, not in that location, to, let's say, the snow on the top of a hill, for instance. You don't do that because you get freeze-thaw and it runs down the slope. Things like that, the owners have to take responsibility for. And that way, when there is a claim, if somebody falls on that pothole, we did the pre-season, we told them to fill that hole. The liability is on them, not us. And we're asking the government to assist us to get this in place so that there would be an independent body managing and controlling all of that regulatory framework with an authority having jurisdiction, and everything gets reported. That's the other thing. We have no idea how many claims we get or the province gets on slip and falls. And with a regulatory framework, all this stuff gets tracked.
Yeah, the other piece I'll speak to there is the concept that weather monitoring is a failed system. So what I mean by that is, as contractors, we sign a contract and the contract can say we're going to plow on 2 inches of snow and then we're going to salt, or we're going to salt on freezing rain, or whatever the description is. But then you get into the hold harmless indemnity clause, and it doesn't matter what happens, what we did, whether we can prove it or not, whether we acted reasonably or not. If there's a claim, we're the ones that are on the hook for it. So what that does, it takes the responsibility and the liability off of the building owner for doing anything on the property. So A storm itself is typically not that dangerous. Not that many claims come during a snowfall. Where they do come from is in between snow events where you have freeze thaw, you have, as Gerald mentioned, downspouts, awnings that catch snow, and then if you get solar radiation, it melts, falls to the ground, and refreezes. We can be monitoring the weather, and it's a lovely, beautiful, clear day, but hazards are developing that we're not aware of. We're not paid to be on site 24/7. I don't think I've ever seen a contract that wants a permanent presence on a site. So why are we responsible for the conditions of that site 24/7? Even if we're patrolling, on a daily basis, nightly basis, there are still things that happen in between. And the building should have some ownership on inspecting, identifying hazards, treating them themselves, or calling us in for a service call. Until that regulatory obligation changes, the system's not going to change. And nothing really is going to change. We're still going to oversalt to prevent those things.
You see, so what we did back in October, we had a lobby day at the government building, which in Ontario we call it Queen's Park. And this issue is really a bipartisan issue because everybody wants to keep the public safe and everybody wants to reduce the amount of salt that we're using. So we've had, I would say, 99.9% support from the elected officials in the province of Ontario for this undertaking. Now what we're working on is we're working through the actual piece of legislation. See, what we're really after, as I said earlier, we want an authority having an independent body, and we call it the TSSA, which is a Technical Standards Safety Association, regulating our industry, which includes owners and contractors. And they would be involved in the education, and they would also monitor the pre-season inspections, and every site would be, in a sense, registered with that body, that governing body, so that if there is an issue, a claim, whatever, it's all tracked.
Yeah, so there's two different models that we've kind of been watching in the States. One has been led by ASCA, and they've had success in changing legislation in terms of the hold harmless and indemnification clauses. They're taking the rights or the ability of the owner just to push all of liability onto the contractor by way of a contract, and really creates things. And it puts an ownership at that point because they can't just say, well, something happened, it's the contractor's fault, he'll pay for it. Now they have a financial stake in the game. And I think and Cheryl, you might know how many states that's been in. I think it started in Illinois. It's had success in Michigan. I think there's probably 5 or 6 others where it's either in process or it's been passed. So that's pretty powerful. The New Hampshire model is a little bit different. And the paradigm as it stands right now is in every other state and every province in Canada is that we as snow contractors are incompetent. That's the basic premise. There's a claim, someone got hurt. We're obviously incompetent because that happened. What we want to do, and so we go through the process and we have to prove, our guys are trained. Yes, we have, calibrated equipment. Yes, we have maintained vehicles and equipment, things like that. So with New Hampshire, the idea is that the contractor is certified. And so the paradigm shifts. They're certified, therefore they're competent. And the plaintiff has to prove that they're not competent, that there was something missing, that they, were egregious in what they did. So if they're certified, the chances of that happening are quite a bit less. Better still, though, is that the building owner is protected. So if they hire a contractor that, I think it's Green Pro is the name of the program. And so the building has an incentive to hire a certified contractor. So it really does elevate the industry. It incentivizes the contractors to become better, to be certifiable, and incentivizes the building owners to hire those contractors and thereby raising the standards in the industry. So we've got those two models. We have what we're doing here in Canada, and sort of a third piece is we're working with SIMA, so Landscape Ontario, Martin Torado. We've had some conversations and trying to harmonize what we're doing. SIMA is developing standards through ANSI, the procurement standard. There's some safety standards in the works right now. And we think it'll make a ton of sense to kind of all be working in the same direction to have these things harmonized. There's really no point in having one set of standards in the States, one set of standards here. different training, different obligations, that sort of thing. We're all in the same industry. We're using the same equipment, the same type of people, and the same problems. We want safe sites and we want to protect the environment. So we should be working together, and that's underway as well. So that's pretty exciting.
I did have another question about another area of liability that I think maybe you were both a part of, which is the limited time frame to file suits, the slip and fall claims in Ontario. Does that play into this at all as well, or is that a separate issue?
It's separate, but it's not. So in Ontario, when I started in this industry, the statute of limitations was 7 years. So that means that I can have an incident today and I've got 7 years to file a claim. Of course, lawyers would take advantage of that, knowing that staff would have moved on, records probably didn't exist, camera footage, that sort of thing. So it was extremely unfair because there's an allegation made and we have no ability to defend it. There was an effort through Landscape Ontario to reduce that to 2 years, and that was a big improvement, but there's still, 2 years is a long time in this industry. The workforce in a lot of cases is transitory. So we might not have the same staff, the people that worked on that site on a given day, closed circuit camera footage, that kind of thing. And it was not uncommon, 2 years less a day to have a claim served, that kind of thing. So it was very much a strategy. We had a private member from sort of Northern Ontario who introduced a bill in conjunction with local contractors. And that statute of limitations has been reduced to 60 days, which is fantastic. Within 60 days, you still likely have this, staff, you have people that were involved that you can interview, camera footage, different things like that. So it's still relatively young in the process. It hasn't been tested at all that I'm aware. For somebody coming in and filing a claim a year later, 2 years later, is a judge going to accept that? Is that going to be a valid claim? But what it has done is it's created awareness. As contractors, we've shared that information with building owners. If they're notified, and that's the obligation of the plaintiff, whether it's a lawyer or just an individual, they have to notify the building. And what we've started doing is put it in our contracts that we in turn have to be notified so that we can start defending ourselves. So I would say definitely it's been a huge improvement. It's kind of outside of what we're doing here. It's not preventing claims. It's not protecting us anymore. It's just allowing us to gather the evidence, the information on a much more timely basis so that we can defend ourselves more effectively.
Yeah, the other advantage is that it helps with insurance companies when they determine your premium for the following year, for the following season. Because now, for the most part, we know 60 days after the season's over. So by June, you've got a pretty good idea if you've got claims or if you don't have claims. The only problem with the legislation is there's no legislation in there telling building owners and contractors that we must inform each other on knowledge of a slip and fall. That's not in there. So it could happen that somebody falls at a site and they don't tell the contractor. That is still a bit of a risk. But for the most part, this is great. And the other thing is when it comes to, as I just said, insurance renewals, you know what you're in for following season.
I think it would also kind of sort of tie back to the self-insurance retention where you focus so much on that documentation, having all of that documentation. They've only got 60 days to do it, having those processes in place to capture what you need to capture, have it ready at hand would seem to work in your favor.
Yeah, it definitely does. Our expectation within the group is that we can produce those logs, within 48 hours. You assume the storm's ended or whatever, had some rest, and then you can start pulling the logs from, the various sources that they have to come from. So 60 days, it really is the reporting. It doesn't change what we're doing within the group, but it does change, how we approach a claim. And yeah, certainly at the end of it, there are fewer unknowns.
So you guys have been really active. We talk a lot about it at SIMA, how we want to continue to improve the level of professionalism of the industry. Advocacy is certainly, one way to do that. With your experience, I guess, how would you recommend people get involved, whether you're in Ontario or whether you're in Wisconsin or, Minnesota, wherever, to kind of enact change to elevate the industry as a professional one?
I think if we can get a standard for North America, that's going to be huge, because what that does, that promotes education of the contractors, and it will promote awareness for buildings and property owners. But I think the biggest problem we have is education and training. And that's, I think, where we're reaping the benefits immediately because we've developed this curriculum program in Ontario as well as accreditation. There's an accreditation piece to it as well. And I think it's going to raise the bar in terms of our professionalism as an industry by doing this advocacy work.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. That's still a little bit down the road. And I think in the short term, I couldn't recommend highly enough to get involved with SIMA, to get involved with Landscape Ontario at whatever level, whether it's attending the symposium or Congress or getting involved on committee levels or on board or whatever it is. The amount of information that you can learn, we're a very open sharing industry, as long as it's not your competitor from next door. My experience has been that, people are an open book and they'll let you know what their experiences have been, what their best practices are, that kind of thing. So fantastic from learning. So I just recommend that in general, regardless of how everything turns out this way. The other piece in terms of being involved, even on a cursory level, is staying educated. So we're trying to create real world stories, the challenges that we as contractors are facing. That helps us when we're dealing with government decision makers. If we can go in with anecdotes or facts, it just really strengthens our case, gives us more credibility, kind of illustrates the breadth of the problem that we're chasing. So we really need people to help out and share their stories and allow us to bring that to the government level so they can see the need for change and support us in our mission. We've covered a lot, and this can be a pretty dry topic. I know at the trade shows, this kind of stuff is not that that much of an uptake. People like looking at the new equipment, new tools, things like that. But this is important. We as an industry, we haven't done ourselves a great service over the years. We should be more educated. We should be more involved. We should be building a fair playing field. So yeah, just educate yourself and stay engaged.
Great. Well, thank you both for being with me today. I appreciate your time. Look forward to see what happens with the standard and going forward. Good luck. Hopefully you get a winter soon. I know right now when we're talking it's green grass and warm temperatures. But thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you again to our sponsors, Western and Fisher, for sponsoring Snow Talk, and we'll see you or talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to Snow Talk, sponsored by Western, Fisher, and SnowX. Check out all of our episodes at sima.org/podcast.